So the Meteora launch pool is dropping tomorrow, and if you've been on Twitter, you'll have seen everybody talking about this with the liquidity generation event, and more specifically, the 10% allocated for the NFT. Should you take the NFT? Should you just claim your tokens? What is actually best? I've been looking over the numbers and I'm breaking down the pros and cons of doing each approach in plain English, just so you need to know exactly what you need to make the call. So what is actually launching? So we know that the MET is starting with a single-sided product curve like is seen in the image with MET versus USDC. And it goes all the way from 50 cents per MET all the way up to $7.50. And that's basically an FDD range of 500 million to 7.5 billion. And further than this, we know that 10% of the total supply can be put into this. So that's up to 100 million MET. And we know that 3% is already done by the dupe stakers. And the other 70% of this allocation is first come, first serve. But this is the key thing. The early trades in those first 1 to 2 minutes will be paying massive fees, whether you're buying or you are selling. And very quickly, as you can see, after even 2.8 minutes, the fee will drop right down. Okay, so now I'm going to show you what the NFT actually does. And I know this table looks a bit ugly on first glance, but I'll try and break it down as simply as possible. And I know someone is making an automated version of this as well. So you can know exactly, depending on how much volume there is, what the market cap hits, whether you could outprint the impermanent loss. And that is the main argument when it comes to taking the NFT versus claiming. So this formula is literally straight from the Google Sheets, which the Meteora team did share. And all it is showing is basically depending on which fully diluted value we hit. So we know we start at 0.5, but depending on where we hit, how much of your MET tokens will have been swapped to USDC and how much you would have lost out versus if you just held the token, and then in the end how much fees you would have to have printed to obviously outweighed that impermanent loss. So it's basically DCAing out for you, which can be a good thing. But if we look at this example, at a 1.19 billion market cap, if the token goes straight to that off launch, excluding fees, so not taking into account any fee earnings, 47% of your MET tokens will have been sold to USDC. So if you had 10,000, you would now be left with around $5,000 and 5,000 MET tokens. If we actually look at this row right here, you'd be exactly on. And if we look at other examples, if the market cap was higher, it went to 1.5 billion, over 56% of your Meteora tokens will have been sold out. And if we look over to this IL versus HODL category, this is simply telling us if you held to a market cap of 1.5 billion instead of putting it in the NFT DAMM position, you are losing out on 24% of the gains. And basically, to make this 24% back, this is what you would need to make in fees. So the question really becomes, if your focus is on these early few minutes, or maybe even the first day, but can the fees outprint the impermanent loss versus holding or versus claiming and making a DLMM position? And this is where we go back to the graph and we have to look at this fee scheduler. We know that the very first few seconds have that 50% fee, but we also know after a minute or two, this drops to around 24%, and then it drops even further down to below 5%. So these first few minutes could be crucial if that wants to be part of your strategy. And this is just where it's really tough to say and why you've seen so many people flip back and forth and debate. But if we did try and, we can try and make some rough estimates about volume, but it's honestly pretty difficult to try and, figure it out. But I did make these two columns, or ChatGPT did, and it's got the fees different. So it's taken a value for the 1 minute and 2 minute. But basically what this table would be saying is, if we went straight to 1.1 billion and it all happened in the first minute, so we wanted to get a full, no impermanent loss with the price rising straight to that, and that is close to the pre-market. If I grab that from Hyperliquid, it's 1.3 billion right now, which is actually a bit higher. If we use that, that's saying with that 24% fee right there, taking that as the average, which we can do, you would need to print 80% of the full TVL in the pool. And if we go over to the spreadsheet again, looking roughly over here, it would be between these two values. We would need about kind of $40 million in volume in that very first minute with that 24% fee. But of course, I'm being incredibly general here. I'm talking about getting fully paid out and making sure you're not no impermanent loss in the first minute. Of course, there'll be fluctuations up and down. There's no guarantee we will even go to this high. And this is only really considering the first 2 minutes. Of course, there's all the time after this where you'll still be earning fees in the pool, and you can remove and also move over to DLMM. But pretty much if we fill the 10% and the price goes straight to the fair market value right now of 1.3 billion, and this happens within a minute, and we actually keep rising, we don't drop below this, most likely, unless there's a crazy amount of volume, you might incur some impermanent loss. But that is only if you're very bullish on the token. It all depends on kind of where you think this will end up. If you think we'll drop back down after this, fluctuate a bit, then of course it's better to hold the NFT. So if we were to break this down, if you think the price will, perform not badly, but it stays below $1 billion, I would say, but we see good volume, I would say NFTs can be a good bet. If you think it might fluctuate kind of in that mid zone, but it also has high volume, also potentially the NFT, but also you might want to claim some. It also depends on how many wallets you have. And if you think we are going to rip just really, really high, we're going to beat all expectations, even on the pre-market, I think it's better to hold your allocation or DLMM just to avoid that impermanent loss. But this is a straight rip, remember. Of course, long term, it could rise, but we're talking about the immediate launch of the token. So it really all depends on what you want to do. I saw this good tweet by Logical TA who said basically, if you have multiple wallets, you could put some in the NFT pool, as you do have to commit to all of it and be able to claim some as well. And I'm thinking I will do this, but obviously I don't want to give any suggestions. I'm just trying to make it a little bit easier to understand why you might want to do the NFT route or why you might want to hodl.